I'm a thumbnail designer and strategist. I've worked with a bunch of people, Eric, FaZe Rug, Preston Plays, Michelle Carre, Mr. Who's the Boss, and so many more. Everything I had to do was color her, create this ring background for the actual mat of the stage. These are almost all of the different variations that we ended up creating for this particular video.
I want to jump right in. Can you break down the thought process behind one of your thumbnails that got, I think, over 18 million views?
Yeah, so this one was a couple months back, and if I remember correctly, Mr. Who's the Boss just has a similar style for most of his videos, especially if they're unboxing videos. So he came to me and essentially wanted him holding this centerpiece, which was this see-through TV. Basically, it was completely transparent. So he wanted himself holding the TV in the middle, and you could see his body behind him, to emphasize the transparentness of it. And basically, underneath the TV was a bunch of boxes that also showed very futuristic looking tech and gadgets.
Okay, so you got the concept, then what do you do from there?
Yeah, so then he sends me over the asset pictures. I believe for this one, it was a picture of him holding a TV, I want to say, but I think I ended up replacing the TV with another image of a TV and made it look a lot more transparent. And then along with the assets, he sent me over a list of a bunch of the products that he also reviewed in the video to add into the thumbnail as well. So all the products that you see below him on the bottom of the thumbnail are actually in the video. So from there, I went and I basically created the boxes all by hand, just using perspective warp and pinching two corners and, extending the other corners just to make it look legitimate in 3D. And I threw on the picture of the products, and I added a bunch of shadows and lighting effects to make it all look realistic.
Okay, nice. How actually do you make those so realistic? I'm curious, is there any technique that you do, or?
Yeah, so I think it all just starts off with me creating a rectangle, and then I throw on the image that goes onto the box. And then I add in another rectangle, line it up with the other one, and then take one of the corners and basically pinch it to make it look 3D. So we basically line it up there and then use the perspective tool and distort to pinch it. And now it looks pretty 3D. And you can take it a step further and add the bottom half of this as well. It's basically the simplest way I can show how to do this, and if you want to take it a step further, you can start adding even more highlights and more shadows.
I like how you do this so seamlessly. Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty the fastest way I could do it.
That's one of the things I was going to comment on, because it's like, if I did something like that, I'd like lose my mind. I'd just try to find like a mock-up, and then there's like a warp mesh tool where you can like drag things onto like the faces of other things,
Yeah.
like you like outline it. That's how I've done it. But this is really interesting. One of the questions I had is, I guess in your opinion, maybe you have like the results to back this up, or maybe you know the answer, is how much does it matter like to make things like realistic, right? Like, I'm sure obviously you just did this mock-up real fast, but like the boxes in that picture are like super well done, like the Nike box, the smart goggles box, right? Like, how long does it take you to make it, and does it matter to go the extra distance?
Yeah, so I think there was definitely easier and probably more straightforward ways of actually creating the boxes than what I just showed. Like you said, you could probably find a mock-up online of a 3D box, and maybe even a box where you could turn it and twist it in a 3D space, which is probably what I would do nowadays. This was back before I had a tool called Envato Elements, which I highly recommend. They have a whole 3D section where you can basically load up a picture of whatever you need. Let's say you needed a mailbox, you can turn it to whatever direction you want and download a PNG image of that. So it's great. That's probably what I would do nowadays. But back then I did not have that tool. So I think it matters a lot to be as realistic as possible, but I also think it depends on your niche. The prime example of this would be MrBeast. His thumbnails are not the most realistic. I think he's trying to turn that way a little bit more nowadays, but they're not super realistic, and that's because his audience is kids. Someone like MrWhoseTheBoss, I would guess that his average demographic would be 18 to 26, something along those lines. But they're a little bit older, so you want to cater towards your audience. So if your demographic is younger, then you can be a little more unrealistic and a little more poppy with the colors and effects. And then if your audience is a little older, you might want to lean more towards the realism so that you don't scare the older kids away and make it look like you're making kids content.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things I actually wanted to follow up on was you were talking about Envato Element as a tool. What are some other tools, either within Photoshop or external, that you use to help create thumbnails? Because it's a question that I get a lot for outside thumbnails, like, you know, how to come up with better ideas, etc. But I want to know what the tool, like, I guess you could say kit for designers is, and maybe you could give a rundown on that.
Yeah, so one of the best tools and most innovative tools that have released recently is generative fill. I know there's a lot of talk about it, but it is honestly a great tool. It's more of a tool than it is a cheat code. I would like to say that, like, all it does is speed up my process, and that's about it. It's not a tool to generate a whole background or add in people or anything like that. It's more of a tool to, you know, add a house into a background or get rid of blemishes or marks on someone's fake face or on any boxes or anything like that. So that's a main tool. I haven't been using Midjourney as much recently, but I think it's still a great and powerful tool to actually generate stuff like backgrounds. And then I get most of my stock photos, like backgrounds or houses or whatever I need, from places like Envato. It has a whole photos catalog, and I also use FreePic as well.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know David has like his own like toolkit with like his AI upscalers, etc. So it's interesting to see how like the different designers go about different like toolboxes and workflows. One thing I did want to ask, and you kind of touched upon it, like, you know, you don't want to make kids content like, or content like too kids focused, etc. Is how do you go about creating like different thumbnail styles for different creators, right? You work with like a ton of different creators, etc. So like, how do you, I guess you could say, develop their specific styles, and like what do you focus on when working from someone like MrWhoseTheBoss to someone in like a business niche to someone like in an entertainment niche? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think I just keep in mind the demographic that the creator has. So for example, I recently started working with this farming YouTuber. Her name is Laura Farms. She basically makes all kinds of content about the farm and the farm work that she does. So before we started working together, I asked her, and I was really curious about her demographic. It turns out her demographic is 65 plus, like 90% 65 plus. Crazy. So right away I just knew, like, the thumbnails need to be realistic. It can't be poppy. It can't be anything too overboard, just because that's not going to cater towards her 65 plus audience. But vice versa of that, someone like Preston, let's say, I know his demographic is a lot younger kids. So things can be a little more unrealistic and a little more exaggerated when it comes to colors or just realism of the scene in general. So if I am curious about someone's demographic and I don't really know what their demographic is, I'll ask them, and from there I'll make a decision whether things need to be a little more realistic or they can be a little more unrealistic.
If we go back to the Who's the Boss video, for example, the background, why did you choose green, for example?
So we actually ended up trying a blue background as well, and I think that was it. But I don't think there was any rhyme or reason to it necessarily. I think it was just, let's have a blank background, you know? And then once the whole thing started coming together, we ended up deciding what colors we thought would be best. We didn't go for red because there's already a couple red items in the scene and it probably would have been a little too distracting. I believe we just thought the green or the blue looked the best, so we just ran with that. It was just a matter of having a blank background rather than having a real background, like maybe, you know, his living room or something. That would be even more distracting with a already pretty complex scene.
And how does it work? Let's say working with him, you do a first draft, you send it to him. Is it to him directly, to his team? And is there a bunch of back and forth? How does it go?
Yeah, so he was honestly pretty chill. Never gave me any crazy revisions or, you know, any crazy requests. Basically, he reached out to me on Twitter, and it was him directly, and he was interested in working together, and he sent me over this brief. I told him I could get it done, and I believe I ended up just sending him the first rough draft, which is usually what I do for all of my clients. And then from there, they send me revisions, and sometimes it's a long list, and sometimes it's a shorter list. I think with Mr. Who's the Boss, it was pretty doable list. You know, it wasn't anything crazy. And then we just keep going back and forth on what we think looks good and what we don't, and what changes we want. And I'll put in my input as well sometimes if I think one decision is going to do better than another. Yeah, from there we keep going back and forth until we get a result we're both happy with.
How long does it take you to do this thumbnail?
I would have to guess, if I remember correctly, this probably took me around 2 to 3 hours, maybe with revisions 4.
Okay. Wow, that's impressive. How many thumbnails you do per week?
Oh man, that fluctuates a ton. As of right now, I would probably say around 5.
One of the questions I had about thumbnails, and you kind of talked about it with Mr. Who's the Boss a little bit, like working with clients, is how do you land like such big clients? Because you have like a crazy portfolio. Obviously, like you said, you're doing 5 thumbnails a week. I know some weeks are probably like crazy, like 10, 15. But yeah, I'd love to know, like, just from a like perspective, you know, I was a thumbnail watching this, like, how do I land clients, and what has that progression looked like over the years?
Yeah, man. So I have 14,000 followers on X or Twitter, but it wasn't always like that. The end of 2021 was when I got my first big break. Before that, maybe 4 years prior, I was mainly just doing gaming videos, and with the rise of Fortnite, I was doing mainly Fortnite thumbnails. And I was doing that for about 4 years, and then I kind of got sick of it, and I was looking for other opportunities, and I came across a job listing Preston had made, and it was for a clickbait strategist. That was what he named the role, and it was actually pretty funny. But I applied. He was looking for a thumbnail designer, and all my prior work had been gaming videos, but there were some faces in the actual thumbnails. So he liked how I edited those faces, and so since his demographic is mostly kids, and I was making gaming videos for kids, or gaming thumbnails for kids, it went hand in hand, and he basically gave me a shot. From there, I started posting the work I had made for him on Twitter, and it just started snowballing. I was gaining followers a ton. I was getting a bunch of inbound. That was a great time, and over the years I've just been posting consistently and gaining followers on X, and you know, just making a name for myself in this community. And now the way people find me like that is, I mean, it either pops up on their feed, my work, and they like it, or just word of mouth from other creators.
Talking about big creators you work with, I'd be curious to know more about the Michelle Carre thumbnail that you did. The thought process behind it's a really clean one and very realistic.
So at the time, I loved this thumbnail, and I still do, but this one was honestly such a pain.
It looks like, yeah.
It was such a struggle to work on, but it was so worth it, and it was so fun. So she did this video where So she has a series on YouTube called Challenge Accepted where she tries a bunch of different hard tasks, hard job roles. She's done some, like, I tried the CIA, I tried firefighting, and this one was I tried a traveling circus. So basically, she trains to perform in a traveling circus with real performers in a circus. And so we wanted to display that in this thumbnail and display a lot of risk because most of her videos there can be some serious injuries happening. So her and her team do a lot of thinking about the thumbnails and a lot of concepting, and once they have something they're happy with, they'll come to someone like me and basically give me the whole brief, and then I get to get started on it.
So you've got the concept, and I guess the perspective of it. But let's say in this thumbnail, how did you think about, for example, making the crowd like that, or I think having the fisheye lens style? Not sure if that's the case, but yeah.
No, I don't think that's a fisheye. I think you're
Oh
just.
yeah, okay, forget that. But like that, yeah, that perspective.
Yeah, so her and her team actually did a great job at taking this photo. This would have been almost impossible if the photo wasn't at the right perspective. I think they ended up putting someone on a ladder and she was actually holding on to something, and they took the photo from above her to give this perspective of it being a top-down thumbnail to really show the scale of what she's doing. So she sends me over the photo and gives me a rough concept for what they want. And basically I get started, and everything I had to do was color her, create this ring background for the actual mat of the stage, and then I had to add in the crowd and add in the guy down here who's basically like the main circus performer, I believe, and then I had to add in this rope swing.
Yeah, I like that you added that guy there. It makes it a lot more clear that it's, I guess, a circus place and gives context. And all the crowd there, is it generative fill, or how did you do that?
No, so the reason why I said that this thumbnail was so difficult but so worth it was actually because of the crowd. The crowd and the actual the rope swing here. So back when I used to do Fortnite thumbnails, I was in Blender all the time, and I was basically working with the 3D models in Blender and moving them and positioning them to the position that I want them to be in. And so I could not find any pictures of a crowd for the life of me from this angle, and this perspective was the reason why this whole thing was so difficult. But I ended up finding a Blender plugin within Blender to generate crowds, and I think it was like $8 or something. I bought it. I was like, I need to get this done. So I bought it, and it worked out so well in my favor. The plugin actually allows you to create circular crowds as well, which is exactly what I needed. So I learned how to generate that crowd, and I did, and I threw it into Photoshop, and it ended up looking great. The only picky thing is that they are not looking up, they're looking straight, but that would have been like impossible to fix. I don't know. But yeah, and then for the rope swing here, this was very difficult as well because I could not find any pictures from this perspective for my life. The most difficult thing was actually the rope itself. This metal pole here is actually just a shape with a bunch of textures and effects added onto it. But these ropes, I could not find any ropes from the perspective that I needed to fit into these holes. So I actually had my friend help me out, who knows a lot more about Blender than I do, and he actually created these ropes for me to use in this thumbnail. Shout out to Leatherleaf.
Nice.
Yeah. I actually thought it was like just super sick, and I think it's really interesting the way that you blended Blender, no pun intended there, into the thumbnail. Like it adds like way more to it, and I don't think it matters too much that they're not looking up. It would have been better, yeah. But overall, I think it's like a super sick thumbnail. Like it's just super interesting. I remember I saw this on my homepage, and I'm like, yeah, I have to click it, right? It felt like super premium, which is kind of where I feel like YouTube is going with these thumbnails, like these incredible like premium realistic thumbnails. So yeah, I just super awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I totally agree with you. This is the way YouTube is trending towards. It's also trending towards more realistic thumbnails. I think people are starting to get sick and tired of the Mr. Beast effect, quote unquote. So the cool thing about this thumbnail was that it was actually featured at a YouTube event called Made on YouTube in New York this past month, and it was showcasing the new features for YouTube on TV, and this thumbnail was actually one of the thumbnails they used to showcase the new layout and everything that they did there. So that was really cool.
I'm actually curious about the realistic part. So how do you make her look so realistic without making it not cartoony, basically?
Yeah, so this is what she and the whole thumbnail looks like before I added the final camera raw filter. So it looks a little darker, but this is Michelle, and now I'm just going to remove all the effects that I added onto her. So this, besides her hand right here, is essentially the raw image that they sent over to me. And basically the way I achieve the realism is firstly by coloring. So I needed to match her to the scene and the lighting of the scene, and that's the most difficult part, but it's also the most crucial part. Lighting is, in my opinion, the most crucial part about making anything realistic, is that the lighting has to match. If the sun is pointing at you from this way, your shadow is going to be this way. And same thing goes for artificial lighting in any thumbnails or something like this, where she can't be this yellow temperature. She has to be cooler, just like the background and just like the lights that are shining on her. And then from there, I added 2 inner shadows to cast some rim lighting to her. And then I messed with the coloring some more, added some dodging and burning, and just cleaned up any blemishes that she had. So we went from this to this, and this is a lot more realistic.
Super clean. And you said you added the hand. How did you do that?
That's also what I wanted to know, because it looks like so good. Like everything just comes together really well here. And like normally when you do, I don't know if it's generative fill or whatever it may be, there's always some type of funkiness, but this is like so smooth.
Yeah, so this was her actual hand. I think the reason that I cut it out and moved it to its own layer is just so that I had the freedom of moving it across this bar and also making it bigger, just to show the perspective of how far down she actually is. Because if her hand is up closer to the camera, it's going to appear a lot bigger than it actually is, or than it is compared to her face. So I believe the main reason I cut out her hand was just so that I had the freedom of moving it and placing it anywhere I wanted along the metal bar.
Got it. Okay, super interesting. And this one, how long did it take you?
With the difficulties I was having, it probably took me 8 hours, something like that. Just because it was so much trial and error to work things out, like the crowd and the rope, and just the perspective of the whole thing is so unique and so difficult to find images online from this exact perspective. So it was hard to mesh things together, but I love how it turned out, and honestly, probably one of my favorite thumbnails.
No, it's great. You made it on YouTube's official event, which is sick.
Yeah, it's one of my like probably thumbnails like the last like year or two. It's just super good. And I did see like the TV preview, and I thought it was like super. It's just it works so well.
I don't want to say I'm surprised by the feedback I got from this thumbnail, but I feel like there's a lot of nitpicky things that don't look super great. Like I feel like I could have done the lighting better, or just some of the effects I could have done better. But I mean, the feedback is great, and it always was great. And so I guess that just proves that I should be happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's what makes you so good, how meticulous you are.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So you say it takes you 8 hours to make this. Is that considered a long time to design a thumbnail?
Yeah, for me personally, that's very, very high up there. Typically my thumbnails take around 2 to 3 hours, and that's about it. But it all depends on the client. It all depends on the amount of feedback and revisions. For this one, I believe there were a good amount of revisions and a lot of tedious revisions, but it was all worth it in the end, and it was all justified, to be honest. Me and Michelle and her husband Garrett, we were all working together trying to figure out how to make this thumbnail perfect. And it honestly took us a long time. And like I said, I think it was because of the perspective and just making everything look realistic from this perspective.
Nice, you killed it. So as a full-time thumbnail designer, how much are you making per year?
Oh man, per year. It fluctuates a lot. I would say on average around 65 to 70K per year. And I also live at home with my parents still. So I don't have any bills or anything to pay. I mean, I love my parents. They're great. They take care of me well. So I have a place to sleep and, call home, and I don't need to pay for any bills or anything like that, which is great. So for me at this age, at 21, that works great for me.
Yeah, so that's really good. I'm curious, how much were you charging before when you first started as a thumbnail designer per thumbnail, and how much are you charging now?
Yeah, so when I first started, if we're talking like way back in the gaming days, I was charging maybe, if I was lucky, like 30 to 40 bucks a thumbnail for hours of work. So that was not great at all. But then once the ball started rolling and I got the job with Preston and started freelancing with more creators, I was charging around 150 to 200 per thumbnail, and now I'm charging anywhere from 400 to 500-ish per thumbnail.
That's super impressive. But yeah, that's what people need to realize. Thumbnail is one of the most important parts of getting a viral video, basically.
100%. I think a lot of people know that. A lot of people are starting to realize how important a thumbnail actually is. But just to put it into perspective, if you don't know, essentially it's your marketing, it's your poster, it's your whole video, honestly, because if people don't like the thumbnail, they're not going to click on the video. If they don't click on the video, you're not going to get any views. And vice versa. If you have a great thumbnail and a lot of people are clicking on it, then you're going to get a lot of views and it's going to go out to more people.
Everyone would agree you're one of the best thumbnail designers in the world, right? How would you recommend an aspiring designer to stand out and get their career started as a thumbnail designer?
That's a great question. I actually made a whole video on this on my YouTube channel, but
Check it out. Yes.
Dill Toma on YouTube.
Let's go.
But I think a couple key main factors is just to find your own style and find your own voice. Just start experimenting with what you think looks good and different techniques that can make you stand out. I think one of my strong suits is my coloring and my face effects. I've heard a lot of people tell me that that's how they can tell if a thumbnail is made by me or not, which is a great compliment. Honestly, it's kind of crazy that you can tell that I made a thumbnail just based off how it looks. Another thing to get started is this trick, and I actually used this when I first started. It's essentially just to dissect other people's work and dissect other creators' thumbnails. When I first started, I would look at people like TKG on X, on Twitter, and I would look at his thumbnails, and since I had a basic knowledge of Photoshop, I would look at his thumbnails and basically dissect them and just figure out how he made the eyes look like this. What did he do to make the skin look like this? And maybe what techniques did he use to get the background to go from this to this, and that kind of just trained my brain to start thinking like a designer and start creating like a top designer. And I think from there, that really helped me and elevated my work.
So obviously, you said you got your start in gaming. How do you think that's affected your approach to thumbnails? Because when we talked to David, he comes from a filmmaking background, so he has a little bit of a different approach when it comes to thumbnails. So I'd actually just love to know what your approach is based on the gaming and how that's potentially helped you in any way.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've honestly never really thought about that, but if I were to think about it, I think it affected the way that I color. I think it affected the way that I color my thumbnails. I think I do lean more towards the unrealistic, a little exaggerated, more kid-friendly content where things are a little more poppy and a little more exaggerated when it comes to lighting or colors. I think that was the main thing, just because the gaming thumbnails needed to be very poppy and very in your face. And obviously when you're working with a video game like Fortnite, the colors are, by default, they're just very exaggerated and very saturated.
I'm curious, what are your 3 tips to make better thumbnails?
I think the first tip would actually go out to creators. Spend extra time taking your thumbnail photos, please. Please.
I can see that.
My good friend Tyler Blanchard has started spending hours taking his thumbnail photos. Like me and him in his recent video, we were on the phone for a couple hours just discussing how he should take this thumbnail photo. But yeah, so for this video, I made an illegal home security system. This is the video and the thumbnails that we actually spent hours on, and he sent me the best assets I've ever seen in my entire life, and I love him for that. These thumbnails would not have been possible without him going the extra mile for these thumbnail pictures.
What makes good assets for you?
So these are almost all of the different variations that we ended up creating for this particular video. So we have 3 completely different concepts and then a bunch of variations of different text options, different arrow options, and just in-betweens of text, no text, arrow with text, no text, etc. So
Nice.
for this first concept, this photo is 90% real. So he actually ended up taking pictures of him crawling into this window. He also gave me extra photos of this turret in focus and out of focus so that I can mesh the 2 together and get a in focus shot of him and also an in focus shot of the turret. And then for this one, this is also 90% real. He sent me a picture of him creeping through this door with the handle in sight and with this rope actually tied to the handle and to the wall.
So what you like is different assets of different parts of the thumbnail, basically, and different perspectives of those.
Yeah, I think the main step would actually be to spend the extra time taking your thumbnail pictures and spend the extra time concepting what the best possible thumbnail is. I think a lot of creators sometimes rush into their ideas and kind of just go with the first idea that pops into their head, when in reality they should be taking that extra time to really think it through and really get some inspiration from other creators or from movies or whatever else it is, and just make sure 100% that the concept you're going to go with is the best possible concept. So my next tip would be to study your surroundings, and study the environments that you're in. If you want to make realistic thumbnails, I would say go outside and just look at how things operate in real life. So look how the sun casts a shadow on this tree and look at the shadow of the tree on the ground and how it works with the grass and just how certain environments look at certain times, like sunsets, for example, or evenings when it's a little darker. Just study your surroundings. If you're trying to make realistic thumbnails, I would say just study your surroundings and learn how the environments in the world like actually looks, and from there you'll be able to use that knowledge and incorporate it into your thumbnails, and you'll be able to tell when something looks realistic and when something doesn't really look 100% real, and then from there you can adjust. Yeah, and then my third and final tip would be to use things like AI and generative fill to your advantage. I wouldn't say to incorporate them into your workflow so much that you're reliant on them, but I would say use them to your advantage when it comes to speeding things up, like your process. So for this thumbnail, for example, I used a lot of generative fill, and here's an example of that. Essentially just getting rid of his hair up here, and all of these little seat cushions here are all generative fill. This would have taken me ages to do by hand. It still would have been possible, but it would have taken a lot longer of time, and it honestly probably wouldn't have looked as good. So my third and final tip would be to use things like AI and generative fill to your advantage to speed up your process, but don't become reliant on them, just because people can tell when you use AI in your thumbnails and when things don't look like you or like your style.
Okay, nice. Those were all very great tips. I know this was a thumbnail change for a now 19 million views thumbnail, right? Can you show
Yep.
the previous one, and how did you go about creating that thumbnail initially?
Yeah, so I honestly can't remember if this was before the time of A/B testing, but I believe someone like Eric probably had access to it at the time. So it was this levitation thumbnail and also the car thumbnail. They were both different bits within that video, so they couldn't decide if they wanted to use the car prank thumbnail as the main thumbnail or this levitation prank thumbnail as the main thumbnail. And the car prank thumbnail actually ended up winning, and now the video's at like 19 million views. So this was the original concept, because the levitation prank is actually the like main prank within the video. So for this thumbnail, we wanted to show a crowd of people, and that's honestly something that you can use to your advantage just to give off more realism and more intrigue. It's like people are actually crowded around this thing trying to, see what's going on, and you have their reactions, and all these people have their phones out and they're all recording. So it just makes you kind of feel left out, honestly, or makes you intrigued to where you're like, why are these people all recording, or why are they all making this shocked face? And yeah, so this thumbnail is on a beach, and we have a little palm tree back there, but the main reason we wanted it to be a beach was just to have the contrast between the red suit and the blue sky and blue water.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
yeah, and then those buildings on the side are actually used as like leading lines straight towards Eric, so that your eyes go directly to him and you can understand what's going on right away.
I really like the framing for this a lot, and I actually think one of the things that sells it. I think the phones are good, but I really actually like the palm tree. Like it just like it breaks the perfectionism a little bit, which I think is good, because without it, I feel like it would be unnatural, right? Like you would never find something like that. Maybe you would, who knows? But I do like the leading lines. I do like how everything is framed. I think the palm tree actually sells it for me.
Yeah, that is actually something that I remember we were going back and forth on. I think we were either going back and forth on if we wanted one on both sides or none, or just the single one. And I completely agree with you. I think the one singular palm tree that's kind of in the middle of everything, that looks like it should have been taken out or removed, actually adds to the realism of it and just sells it more. You're right about the symmetry. This thumbnail is very symmetrical, but that one palm tree throws it all off. But because it throws it all off, it makes everything look and feel realistic.
Would not have thought of it like that, but it makes sense now.
That's how I look at it. Because if it's too symmetrical, that's like thumbnails I won't click on YouTube are ones that look too perfect. Just because it's like it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't feel tied to reality. There's like an uncanny valley feel about them.
We also have our own thumbnails for this podcast, right? I'd love it if you could roast us and actually give us some feedback on how to improve them. So this is our template right now. We try to make it as clear as possible with a catching phrase. What do you think of the colors, the perspective? Yeah.
Overall, everything stands out. It looks pretty good. But the one thing that is very inconsistent with these thumbnails and kind of throws me off is the coloring of everyone's face. You have like the guy in this thumbnail is very washed out and very low contrast and just doesn't look like it's shot professionally, honestly. And then you have a image of David here where it looks very professionally shot. The colors are very nice. There's realistic contrast and so on. There's just an inconsistency with the actual coloring of the faces on your guys' thumbnails. Like for example here, this one of how I gained 40k subs from one video. Once again, it looks poorly lit, so it kind of loses the professionalism and the credibility that you guys have and that this channel has. I would honestly try and focus on creating a formula for the actual pictures in the thumbnail. And then another thing, yeah, so to be honest, I would need to study it more and kind of think about it more. I know podcast thumbnails are just like, it's hard to come up with something unique, but if you do and you get it to work again, just like how this style works for everyone, then I think it could be really, really good for you. I don't think there's nothing special about these thumbnails. It honestly just feels like everyone else's thumbnails, maybe just with a different color. Like Diary of a CEO uses red, Colin and Smear uses their yellow. You guys are using this blue. It just all feels the same, honestly.
I feel you. I agree.
But if you are going to stick with this style, then I would try and dial down on the faces and maybe do a little bit more editing to the faces.
And now for some rapid fire questions.
What is your favorite thumbnail you've ever seen on YouTube?
That's not a rapid fire question.
Yeah, it is. You just got the first thing that comes to your mind.
This is not yellow.
Ooh, that's a great one. Wow, that's a really good one. That's like
Good
the best
answer.
answer I've had to any question ever on the podcast. It's my favorite answer. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, next up is, who do you think has the best thumbnails on YouTube?
Probably Michelle Carre. I don't make all of them, so that's not being biased. Michelle, or I honestly love Preston Ghost thumbnails.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's a good one. It's a solid one. Who do you think has the most underrated thumbnails on YouTube?
Nico Amalana.
Oh, that's a good one. Wow, these are great.
Bro,
These
those are good answers, man.
These are incredible. Like 3 really good answers back to back to back. Like Pressy Goes, This Is Not Yellow, and I'm not going to be able to say this last time. Yeah.
Yeah, what's one thing you've learned recently that helped you create better thumbnails?
I found this new AI tool, actually, that people were talking about in my thumbnail Discord server. It's called Ideogram. And I honestly might be canceling my Midjourney subscription and purchasing the Ideogram subscription. I think it just does things a lot more realistic and it also has a feature called Magic Prompt. So essentially I can type in like cardboard tank driving down a suburban road, and that's it, and it'll create a magic prompt for that as well, and basically add to the prompt without me needing to go into very specific details about it. Yeah, that's a new tool that I've came across recently that I think I'm going to start using.
If you had one YouTuber you can invest into, who would it be and why? And we're treating the YouTuber like a stock, right? So Mr. Beast is a blue chip YouTuber, right? And then if you have like, a guy that's like, a penny stock, the dude who did the salt fork video, or the I traveled 10,000 miles to ride a fake snow, like those would be examples of like, like moonshot, like penny stock YouTubers. So if you could invest into a YouTuber like a stock, who would it be and why?
Oh, if I had to invest in a up and coming YouTuber, it would honestly probably be Bonzo. Have you guys heard of him?
Yeah, okay,
Oh,
Yeah, my
it's this
bad.
guy. That's the second time I've seen someone invest. That's so funny.
Nice.
That's so funny. Yeah, man, he basically creates like these beautiful storytelling, like short film kind of videos that they're like vlogs, but they have a meaning to them. You leave with a feeling, you leave with like emotions, but it's in the style of a YouTube video, if that makes sense. It's like a YouTube vlog, but with emotion and feeling and meaning. So if I had to invest in someone, it would probably be him.
Cool. And last question. You're living a good life. You're young, 21, working with all the biggest creator in the world. What's your dream?
I honestly can see myself in front of the camera, actually creating my own content. And what that looks like is it would be a mix of like Ryan Trahan, Nico Amalana, and Kelly Wakasa, where it's just these experiences and feel good stories of stories that I'll be able to tell my kids and like show my kids. I think that'd be so cool, and just to document my life and my experiences, and just have a place where I can just share my stories and share my creativity, and just have the experience to have these crazy once in a lifetime experiences.
Well, you definitely have that creative mind, so I can really see you do nice storytelling type videos and the style you said. So yeah, looking forward to that.
I appreciate it. It's a long shot, but you said a dream, so maybe
Go
one
for
day.
it, man. Go for it. What are you waiting for? You could do it now.
I'm honestly, I started my thumbnail content, right? I think that's gonna be my in to actually creating content. Thumbnails was my in to like the whole YouTube scene.
Yeah. Us
Um,
strategy. So yeah.
And then creating content about thumbnails is going to be my into actually creating content and learning the process of creating a YouTube video and what it takes to actually create like a good and successful video as well.
Well, if you ever have any questions around starting your channel, strategy, you've got the #1 in the world here with Vex, and and I can help out as well. Well, Dill, thanks for joining us on the 1 of 10 podcast. Is there anything you want to tell the viewers?
Yeah, just keep creating and keep having fun, create what you love. And yeah, follow me on X at Dill Toma, Toma. And you can watch my videos on YouTube as well, same handle. And yeah.
Well, guys, click on this other video about thumbnails, and until next time, peace.